Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. This is Perpetuality. We have reached 10,000 subscribers on this channel, a significant milestone that would not have been possible without your support. Thank you so much. Now with that being said, I have the Super Squale here for review and consideration today, and it is lent in by my friend Rod at Crown and Bezel. Thank you so much for lending these watches to me to check out today for this video. Crown and Bezel are the main authorized retailer and distributor for Squale watches within Canada, and I certainly would recommend them if you're interested in checking out not only Squale, but they do carry Hemel and Mito watches as well. Now with that being said, let's get on with the video. Now I have here both the Tudor Black Bay 58 brought along with the Super Squale because I have an interesting comparison to make. I'm going to be comparing more of the two Super Squale models today as well, both on the bracelet, the beads of rice, and also on the rubberized leather strap that is included on the blue variant here. Now as we get into the details, this is a throwback to the Super Squale that is of the 1960s. In 1959, Charles van Buren had registered the trademark for the Super Squale, and back then it was a title reserved for Squale's early skin divers. Skin diver watches are usually not meant to be worn entirely on the wetsuit. They're more for amateur divers, thinner and more wearable. But I want to talk about the dial quality of the Super Squale. I've got here the Tudor Black Bay 58 just for comparison's sake. On a 4x magnification macro lens. Typically speaking, my videos are done here with 2x magnification, as you can see. However, when you get closer at 4x magnification, the Tudor is great, and you can see it's near perfect. There's a minor blemish within the printing of the logo, but here is the Super Squale. Check out how crisp that logo or crest is. And as we get closer to the text of the Tudor Black Bay 58, it is very sharp as you come to expect, but the Squale is no slouch. It is supremely cleared and defined. I am quite impressed. I came to learn that Squale has their own in-house dial maker, and it genuinely shows the attention to detail. Look at how the reflection of the hands and just how clean cut the hands are at 4x magnification. It's comparable to the Tudor. And I have to say, this isn't what I expect from a watch that costs less than half the price of the Tudor, and sometimes even a third, depending on where you can find this watch, on the configuration of the bracelet or the strap. This is mighty impressive, and this sets the tone for the rest of the video. At a glance, you could even say that these could be siblings. One, of course, is measured in at 38mm compared to the larger Tudor, but if you look at the dial color, this muted type of petrol blue is such a close match to each other, only the bezels separate them in differences. Now, I'll get on that more later. The watch itself features an SW200 movement that is good for up to about 6 seconds per day. Now, the beat error is actually very consistent compared to the Tudor, which has its own in-house movement. Yes, the Tudor is a little bit more accurate, keeping about 2 seconds or losing 2 seconds per day. These movements are quite comparable when you look at the real-world consistency of them. Mind you, the Squale does cost a lot less, and I think this is where I want to lean into the video. There are plenty of vintage-styled dive watches out there, but few wear as nicely as the Super Squale, and it boils down to its proportions. At 38mm wide, and a very nicely proportioned 18mm lug width with 45mm lug-to-lug length, this is a watch that will wear quite compact. Now, if you take a look at the profile of the case and you look at just the finish work here, not a single surface is polished outside of that gentle ring that separates the bezel to the mid case. I quite like how this case has been brushed and finished with very fine satinated brushing. And I have to say that the quality is present here. It is very nicely done. I love the way that the case engages with light. And just to compare it with the more expensive Tudor Black Bay 58, again, the finishing on the Squale is slightly larger, more grainy, but it is no slouch compared to the Tudor. And that 12mm thick case is just delightfully thin. I love it. The case back indicates automatic 20 Atmos. It's good for 200 meters of water resistance, and it has this kind of engine turned wave engraving that is really pleasing to take a look at and engage with light. The Squale curved fish logo is also on the back as well. It's a very simple case back and I appreciate it. The crown is also signed with the family crest of Squale from the Von Buren family, and I quite like that touch. It is a screw down crown. Just to compare with the Tudor, this is the engraving on the Tudor, and I can say that from crown to crown, the crown on the Super Squale could be sized up a little bit more. In my opinion, it is just a hair too small. If it is just about 6.5 to 7 millimeters in terms of size, it would be perfect. The term value for money gets tossed around a lot when describing watches these days, but that is highly subjective. In my view, comparing it to the more expensive Tudor Black Bay 58, just to give a frame of reference, I do not feel like the Super Squale is far behind the Tudor in any regard. In fact, when we look at the elements that we interface with from the Super Squale to the Tudor, starting off with the bezel, it is a 120 click bezel with a very positive, gratifying click. There is hardly any play within the bezel. It's highly impressive how this is put together. I wished it was a little bit notchier and less ambiguous than the Tudor Black Bay 58, which I think for its 60 click bezel is still the definitive benchmark for how a bezel should feel like, until you get as far up as, let's say, an Omega Seamaster or a Rolex Submariner. The strap on the Super Squale, especially the blue variant, it is this rubberized textured leather strap. Now in regards of its comfort, it's on the thicker side. It will take time to conform to your wrist, but it's a high quality stitch strap at that, with a very nice family crest buckle, pin buckle that is, that comes with the strap as well. And I do have to say that it is, in terms of proportion, if Squale wanted to make this watch feel larger, all they needed to do was give this watch a 20mm lug width, and it would fulfill that requirement. The black dial variant that I have here today is on the Beads of Rice bracelet, and I'm not a particular fan of the Beads of Rice style of bracelet on my dive watches. I prefer the bracelets to feel a little bit more sturdy, if you will. However, I will not argue to say that the quality of the bracelet on the Super Squale is a great one. Now, as I've mentioned, most of the case has been brushed, so having a bit of polished elements to break up all of that brushed surfaces is a nice touch, especially when you have it on this Beads of Rice bracelet. And you can tell that the way that the bracelet tapers down, it's gonna keep that 45mm lug to lug width fairly close to your wrist. In regards to the overall solidity of the bracelet, I have to say that most of the Beads of Rice of bracelets I have interacted with, they are not as solid as this bracelet here. It has great flow on the wrist. It has brushed outer sections met with high polished center parts that make up the Beads of Rice. It is a good quality bracelet with a safety clasp with multiple points of adjustment here. As you can see, there's 5 of them, and you do get screw links, so these are easy to remove the links and resize accordingly. This is a great overall feeling bracelet. I cannot comment on this enough, and it has certainly impressed me as if I were to be the person to get this watch. Considering that there's about $100 to $110 price difference in Canada, that is, from the leather strap to the bracelet, I would certainly have this watch on the Beads of Rice bracelet and order the strap after the fact. I like that Squale has gone for the conventional Sellita SW200-1 here, which means that it's going to be a predictable, reliable movement to service, work on, get parts for. This is a watch that you can keep for a while. Now, mentioning that the movement is only good for 38 hours might be something that is a mark against it, but truth be told, if you have enough watches to rotate through, it's not much of an issue. Comparing the two watches, I certainly feel that having the Tudor right beside the Super Squale, the size difference is extremely noticeable in terms of width of the case, but the overall thickness of the cases are similar. The Tudor measures in at 11.9mm and the Squale just 12mm thick. The Black Bay 58 is not your typical dive watch, or skin diver I should say. It doesn't have that very distinctive compact case design, so therefore having it side by side to the Super Squale, you can see that it's chunkier. It isn't as svelte. Take a look at how the case of the Super Squale curves off so elegantly, and even just noticing how the case itself and the bracelets of both of these watches, there's hardly any overhang on the bracelet, which means that these are going to wear wonderfully on the wrist, and we'll get more on that in just a moment. Now that you have seen the Super Squale's bracelet, let's compare it to the Tudor and see just how big of a difference it is in price and quality. The Tudor Black Bay 58 clasp has these ceramic ball bearings that give a very positive click in the action of the clasp and the closing of the safety mechanism. I would say that the overall finish work of the Tudor Black Bay 58 and the bracelet is of a higher standard. That the faux-like rivets that also hide the screws for the bracelet is a nice touch, although many have said that this is something that they could leave on the table. I say that the satinated brushed finishing of the Tudor feels more luxurious than the Super Squale. But mind you, if this is an honest and earnest dive watch you can wear every day, you will hardly complain about that, I promise you, unless you're looking at the finish work very closely. Both of these watches use BGW9 blue superluminova type of lume, and that means that they're going to be fairly bright, but they're not going to last nearly as long as the green superluminova formula that we know and love. Now, comparing both of these watches, you can see that after a bit of time, I'd say this is just about a minute after I have lit up the watch with the UV light, it does fade away and it isn't nearly as bright as the Tudor. Now, comparing the Tudor's lume, just from right out of the gate with the UV light, it is bright. I think there's just more luminous material applied to the indices here, and even after about a minute, it still remains brighter than the Super Squale. You certainly are getting your money's worth in this department. Both of these watches have similarities, and I think that if one is budget-minded, looking for a vintage-feeling dive watch that is just a great-looking overall, well-constructed piece, the Super Squale should be on your map. Now, the Tudor Black Bay 58 has been in the market for a while, and that means that there's plenty of videos commenting on the comfort of this watch. Even though it has a slightly longer lug-to-lug length, a few millimeters longer than the Super Squale, it still is very comfortable. But the Super Squale at 45mm lug-to-lug length, it blows it out of the park in terms of on-the-wrist comfort. One can argue that the Super Squale would probably do better with a slightly larger lug width and support 20mm lug straps. I think that might upscale the watch in terms of size, as I've mentioned. But you know what? In terms of overall vintage feeling, it's appropriate. This is how watches were sized back then in the 60s, and this is a very faithful reissue. Very much like how Tudor went back into its catalog to release the Black Bay 58, but that has been more of a reinterpretation of sorts. I'd say the Super Squale is just a fantastic nod to the past with a look to the present, and you should definitely add it to your list of watches to consider if you love this genre of watch. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you following along, and if you liked the video today, please consider subscribing and following along for more content.